Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat
Norma
shalom.
wearing a tanker like me. I love it. Must be hot on Bell Harbor over there. It is great to see you, Ben and Michael, Phyllis. I see Brian, Leslie, Gail, Judy. You guys are popping on so quickly. Hold on, it's being recorded. Oh, I love RM's iPhone number 1619 LMU. They are such great congregants. Shabbat shalom to all of you. It is great to have everyone here tonight. I see. God, there's a lot of people that I am new to. I'm Rabbi Amy Morrison, joined on the bema by our cantor Rochelle Nelson. We have our percussionist, Jose Blanco. On piano, the Michigan fan, Pat Seymour. We're joined in the sanctuary by Mark Nedlin, who you will hear from later, who is overseeing our entire centennial program and tonight's Love of Legends. Jeannie Bernard, the queen of our custodial team, Maria Ayerbe, who is up for 3 Latin Grammys, no joke, best song, best album, and best, Maria?
Album of the year, best recording, and song of the
A
year.
song, best recording, and album of the year. We will have a watch party. And Paula Xanthopoulou, who is running our IT, but also keeping us in good spirits. We are going to begin with singing Lechune Ranana. You can find this in your prayer books. Please check out your chat for a link to Mishkan Tefillah.
And it's on page 12.
I'm trying to figure out how to do it.
Lechune ranana l'Adonai, Naria letzu yishenu. Lechune ranana l'Adonai, Naria letzu yishenu. Nikadma fana betoda bizmerot Naria lo. Nikadma fana betoda bizmerot Naria lo. Let's try it again. Lechune ranana, lechune ranana l'Adonai, Naria letzu yishenu. Lechune ranana l'Adonai, Naria letzu yishenu. Nikadma fana betoda bizmerot Naria lo. Nikadma fana betoda bizmerot Naria lo.
As we come together this Shabbat, we look at these gorgeous flowers on the podium. These are sponsored by Anat Galor and Victor Perez in honor of their son's bar mitzvah tomorrow. Ariel Galor will be called to the Torah as he leads us in not only the Torah service, but our entire morning minyan. I hope that you will join us at the same Zoom link at 10 a.m. tomorrow. He is an incredible young man who in the last few months has sprouted about 1.5 feet.
Easily.
So all young men out there who have yet to sprout that high, I think that this is a mensch to follow. The candles this evening, although I don't see them logged on yet, please let Ian Reese know we are lighting tonight's candles in memory of his mother, Hilda Reese. As we do so, we turn to page 2 in our prayer books.
Did they have those flowers last week? No, they didn't. You have the right.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam
That's not
asher kirishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu להדליק נר של שבת. Amen.
There's Gail up there.
Just as we welcome in Shabbat, we welcome all of you And so we say Shabbat Shalom to Alice Miller and Fran Levy, to Ben Cuny, to Brian Leslie, to Bunny Uriarte, to Eve Pinder, Francis Siegel, Gail Lewis, now Ian Reese and Jill Rappaport-Reese, to Jacob Berkovici, to Jim Essera and Jose, to Judy's iPhone and her iPad, to Lois Ruckheiser, to Mark Lamb, to Cookie, to Michael, Norma O, to Oliver Hertzfeld. We wish Shabbat Shalom to Patty Taxcraven, to Phyllis Littman and Richard Lee, to my parents and my grandmas, to Tina Forrester, to Mark Nedlin, who is joining us here. We also wish Shabbat Shalom. I saw someone just logged on. Hold on. We wish Shabbat Shalom to all of you, but Phyllis Littman's iPhone has joined us. It is great to have both you and your iPhone, Phyllis, and all of you who are also watching on YouTube. Shabbat Shalom, as we now turn to our Kabbalat Shabbat songs, which begin on page 24.
Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem, Malachi Hasharet, Malachi Elyon, Mimelech Malachi Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shalom Aleichem, Malachi Hasharet, Malachi Elyon, Mimelech Malachi Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shalom Aleichem, Malachi Hasharet, Malachi Elyon, Mimelech Malachi Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Borachem Shalom, Malachi Hashalom, Malachi Elyon, Mimelech Malachi Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Borachem Shalom, Malachi Hashalom, Malachi Elyon, Mimelech Malachi Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Borachem Shalom, Malachi Hashalom, Malachi Elyon, Mimelech Malachi Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu Nil Shalom, Malachi Hashalom, Malachi Elyon, Mimelech Malachi Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu Nil Shalom, Malachi Hashalom, Malachi Elyon, Mimelech Malachi Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu Nil Shalom, Malachi Hashalom, Malachi Elyon, Mimelech Malachi Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch. Last verse. Say Techem Shalom, Malachi Shalom, Malachi Elyon, Mimelech Malachi Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Say Techem Shalom, Malachi Shalom, Malachi Elyon, Mimelech Malachi Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Say Techem Shalom, Malachi Shalom, Malachi HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Kol Hanishama.
Kol Hanishama Hallelujah, Hallelujah. Kol Hanishama Hallelujah, Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Bekocho, Hallelujah, Bekiuzo, Hallelujah, Bikutav, Hallelujah, Kerov Kudo, Kohan Shama, Kohan Shama, Ti Hallelujah, Hallelujah, Kohan Shama. Hallelujah, Hallelujah, Hallelujah. We take the shofar, Hallelujah. shama, hallelujah, b'tziltzulei trua, kol hanshama, hallelujah. Last time, everyone. Kol hanshama, hallelujah. Hallelujah. Kol hanshama, hallelujah. Hallelujah. All right.
Lachado D,
Now
page
we're in
20.
Miami. Lachado-di, likrakala, pene Shabbat, nekabela. Lachado-di, likrakala, pene Shabbat, nekabela. Shamor וזכור בדיבור אחד, השמיענו אל המיוחד, אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, לשם תפארת ולתהילה. לחדותי לקרא כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לחדותי לקרא כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לקראת שבת לכו ונלכה, כי מקור הברכה, מראש מקדם נסוכה, סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה. לחדותי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לחדותי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. מקדש מלך עיר מלוכה, קומי צאי מתוך ההפכה, רב לך שבט בעמק הבכה, והוא יחמול עלייך חמלה. לחדותי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לחדותי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה.
Please rise.
בואי ושלום עטרת בלה, גם בשמחה ובצהלה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה. בואי חלה, בואי חלה. לחדותי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לחדותי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה.
You may be seated. We have so many people who got moved by that song, so moved that they logged on. So we wish a Shabbat Shalom to Judith, to iPad, to Lee Rothschild, be safe as you drive, to Wendy Salzberg, to Cecile and Lilu, to Linda Searles, to Nancy Feldman and Art Taxman, to Nancy Cannett, and in a minute, you'll have to tell her I said this, to Diane Lindener. We continue now in our service with the Baruch Hu on page 28. I invite you to please rise again as we join in our call to worship.
Lai, 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 ya la la lai, ya la la lai, la la lai. Lai, 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 ya la la lai, ya la 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 la. Lay 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 la 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 lay la la lay 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 la 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 lay la la lay ya la la lay. Barechu et Adonai hamevorach. Baruch Adonai hamevorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch Adonai hamevorach le'olam va'ed. Lay 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 ya la la lay ya la la lay ya la lay 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 ya la la lay ya lay 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 lay.
You may be seated as we continue now on page 30 with Ma'ariv Aravim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bidvaro ma'ariv aravim b'chokhmah poteach she'arim uvivuna mishane itim umachalif et hazmanim umisader et hakochavim b'mishmerateham barakia kirtzono b'rei yom v'layla golel or mipnei choshech v'choshech mipnei or uma'avir yom uvein layla umavdil bein yom uvein layla Adonai tzvaot shemo Achai v'kayam tamid yimloch aleinu leolam va'ed.
Baruch atah Adonai hama'ariv aravim.
Blessed are you, Adonai, who brings on the evening. Amen.
Amen.
We wish a Shabbat Shalom. It's a quick one, Pat, but I'd love it. To Yvonne Linares, to Diane Lindener, now that she can hear us. Hold on, I just saw our speaker is here. Hold on. I want to make sure that I saw correctly. I think I did. Didn't you see her? Come on, Paula. All right, well, I will announce it when I see it. So Shabbat Shalom to all of you as we continue now in our preparation for the words of the Shema with Ahavat Olam on page 32.
Ahavat Olam Beit Yisrael Amcha Ahavta Torah u'mitzvot u'kim u'mishpatim otanu limadeta. Al ken Adonai Eloheinu b'shodbeinu u'vkumeinu nasiach b'chukecha v'nismach b'divrei toratecha u'v'mitzvotecha le'olam va'ed. Ki hem l'chayenu ve'orach yameinu ve'orach yameinu u'vehem negei yomam v'layla yomam v'layla v'yavat achar tasim imenu le'olamim. Baruch atah Adonai
Baruch Shemo.
Ohev Amo Yisrael.
Amen. We rise for the Shema.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed.
You may be seated if it's your custom. We continue with the traditional chanting of Ve'ahavta, page 36.
Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta ba'am v'shivtecha b'beitecha u'lechtecha v'derech u'shochbecha u'kumecha וקשרתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתיכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם אלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
We continue now in English on the top of page 39 together. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before we ever stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. I wish we could join hands in this sanctuary. I wish we could march and dance and sing a la Herbie Klein, Zichron Livracha. But we must do it in our own homes, in our own hearts. We must join our voices in one accord and elevate it to that of holy as we join in the singing of Mi Chamocha, page 40.
Who is like you, Adonai? Who is like you, Adonai? Ya la la la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. Bichamocha ba'elim Adonai, bikamocha nehedar b'kodesh, no רק תהילות עושה פלא, no רק תהילות עושה פלא. יאללה לילה, יאללה לילה לילה, יאללה לילה לילה, יאללה לילה לילה, יאללה לילה, יאללה לילה לילה, יאללה לילה לילה, יאללה לילה לילה. Who is like you, Adonai? Who is like you, Adonai? Bichamocha ba'elim Adonai, bikamocha nehedar b'kodesh, no רק תהילות עושה פלא, no רק תהילות עושה פלא.
We continue now as we join in the words on page 43. Let there be peace and love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Adonai, help us to walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts and eternity in our thoughts, that we may lie down in peace and rise up waiting to do your will. Baruch atah Adonai, hapurei sukat shalom, aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael ve'al Yerushalayim. May we all be kept safe, kept shelter, kept in God's great compassion under Kanfei HaShekhinah, God's wings, as we join together in the words of Hashkivenu on page 42.
והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים, לחיים. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים, לחיים. ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך ותקדנו בעצה טובה מלפניך והושיענו למען שמך. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים, לחיים.
Cancer, when I tell you I love someone, you plug the schemato with her. I love it.
I'm going to have an entire songbook of just her music.
Eventually, we will just have Alana Arian here
That's
to
it?
perform, and then that'll be what
She'll
we
certainly
do.
be back on the Jewish Voice, so you can be sure of that.
Yes, and she has a new album dropping next week, Alana Arian. So
All
if
right.
anyone wants to learn some new music, including myself,
Right,
we
and I will have to learn the entire album.
you will have to.
Yes, I know.
But we have a lot of people joining us. Is that the first screen, Paula? We go back to the first. Oh, I thought only 2 people were dressed and on the camera. It's good to see that there are more. So we wish Shabbat Shalom to Sarah Levitin, to Jackie Greenberg and Richard French, to Susan Hofstein, to Carla Newfield. I don't know who Carla's with tonight because I don't see her screen, but I bet she's joined by family. To Nancy Feldman, who I said Shabbat Shalom to, but now we're sitting at her Shabbos table. To Debbie and to Jerry Schwartz. It is great to have all of you with us as we now move our service into the central prayer, the Tefillah, the Amidah. I invite the congregation to please rise as we face east towards Jerusalem and turn to page 46.
Adonai, sefatai tiftach, ufi yagi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah. Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, Bekonei Hakol, Bezocher Chasei Avot ve'Imahot, Umevi Geula Livnei B'neihem, L'man Shemo Be'ahava, Melech Hozer u'Moshia u'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham ve'Ezrat Sarah. Atah Gibor le'olam Adonai, Mechayeh hakol atah Rav le'Hoshia. Mashiv haruach u'morid haGashem, Mechalkel chayim bechesed, Mechayeh hakol berachamim rabim. Somech noflim ve'rofech olim, Umatir asurim, umekayem emunato, lishenei afar, michamocha ba'al gevurot, umidom melach, melech memitz umechayeh, umatzmiach Yeshua, b'nei amanata lehachayot hakol. Baruch atah Adonai, Mechayeh hakol. Atah kadosh v'shimcha kadosh, u'kdoshim b'chol yom yahalelucha selah.
Baruch atah Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. You may be seated. We turn to the top of page 55. May these hours of rest and renewal open our hearts to joy and our minds to truth. May all who struggle find rest on this day. May all who suffer find solace. May all who hurt find healing on this day. May all who despair find purpose. May all who hunger find fulfillment on this day. And may this day fulfill its promise. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh hat Shabbat. Praise to you, Adonai, who sanctifies this holy day of Shabbat. Amen.
Amen.
We continue now as we move to page 56, our prayer that reminds us that when we give prayer in good intention, we must still remind God that that is how we have sent it, so that it is received that way. The words of Ritzeh.
Adonai Eloheinu be'amcha Yisrael Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu be'amcha Yisrael Utefilatam Tefilatam be'ahava tikabel Utefilatam be'ahava tikabel Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu be'amecha Adonai Eloheinu be'amecha Yisrael Utehi l'ratzon tamid avodat Yisrael amecha Utehi l'ratzon tamid avodat Yisrael amecha Meseh Adonai Eloheinu be'amecha Yisrael Meseh Adonai Eloheinu be'amecha Yisrael Baruch atah Adonai hamachazir Shechinato Letzion.
We continue now with our moments of gratitude. I invite you at home to enter those moments into the chat. I see Dr. Ian Reese has joined us on the screen, and I don't know if Deborah and Jerry heard me say Shabbat Shalom to you both. It is good to have you as well. And Franny's home, which means Ezra's home, so thank you for driving him home. So I invite you to enter those words of gratitude in the chat, to say those words out loud where you are, and we will share them in a moment. Any in the sanctuary? Cantor, I know you have one.
Oh, yes, I do.
Do you have the certificate? I don't think so. She got to turn her mic on so everyone can hear this.
Very
There we go.
important. My puppy, Lila Tova Nelson, has just gotten her certificate. After 3 months of training, she is a service dog.
Mazel tov.
Thank
Mazel
you.
tov. That needs a bark mitzvah coming up.
She's going to have
for
a
that.
bark mitzvah. She's going to have, oh
bark
my
bat
God.
mitzvah.
She's going to have a vetting.
Yes,
whatever.
amazing. Any moments of gratitude? Jose? Jose had an amazing week. That's awesome. Pat? Good to be here, Pat. Really, always consistent. I love it. Mark, any moments of gratitude? So Mark, I have to repeat it just so you guys know because they can't hear. Mark is grateful for this evening's first Lev of Legends event, many that we'll be having this year in honor of our centennial year. It's going to be incredible. You just have to stay where you are and you will be able to join us for that. Jeannie. Happy to have another Friday. Amen. Maria Ayerbe. Happy for the weather. I wonder, I guess Maria's a sweater wearing Colombiana. Is that true? Yes, wow. Paula, what are you grateful for? Paula is grateful to have Mark Nedlin with us in the sanctuary tonight. That is absolutely the case. I am grateful for two exciting things at Temple Israel. One, we have had our 14th and 15th person sign up for our Israel trip, which is amazing. So I see some of you on the screen that have said you're going that have not signed up, Ian and Jill, and a bunch of others. So I hope that you will, I hope that you will go on after Shabbos and sign up. And the other is that Temple Israel, really in an unbelievable showing of family support, has signed up 19 of our religious school students for URJ summer camps this summer. We had 14 go last summer, which was unheard of. But to have 19, it is more than 65% of our religious school will be going to Jewish summer camp this summer, Reform Jewish summer camp. I could not be more proud of the work that Brian Kellert has done to make this happen, and all of you and all of your families have done to support the camping system that so many of us grew up in. So I want to see the moments of gratitude that you have. I did go to the eye doctor today. I do need new glasses, which you all could have told me because I can never see these. But, okay, we got to go slowly. Tina, grateful for some Miami fall weather, just like you, Maria. Sarah Leviton, I'm grateful my nurse's aide and I went to see the Jewish Museum of Florida today to see the wonderful Barbra Streisand exhibit. We also had dinner at Cafe Creme. Alice Miller is grateful for health and happiness and love. Yvonne Linares, grateful for our temple's opening soon. From your mouth, Yvonne. Jim, I'm grateful for reaching my 6-month anniversary at my job. I remember when you started. Mazal Tov. Brian Leslie, gratitude to my wonderful parents. May they rest in peace and loving memory. Amen, Brian. Lee Rothschild, great to be home. Too much traffic. Joy to be with all of you. Happy Halloween as well. And I saw Reagan joined us, so Shabbat Shalom to Reagan. Richard Lee, grateful for health and family. Norma Arvitz, so pleased to be able to host Marcia Zarovitz for tonight's inauguration of Lev of Legends. Sarah Leviton adds, also grateful that my oncologist told me that I continue to get better. Thank God. Reagan, I'm grateful for my dad for taking care of me all of this time and how nice he is to me. And I can just describe how much I love him. There's not enough numbers to describe how much I love him. Also, my brother Matthew and my sister, my PC, desk, Wi-Fi, my nanny Lily, Rabbi and Cantor, for Maria Ayerbe and Pat, and of course my Aunt Cecile. She's a huge inspiration for my life, and God and oxygen, having food and a roof over my head. So true, every single one, Reagan. Patty is grateful for now being able to hear and see the TI service. Grateful for my lovely lady friends at lunch this week and my family on the service too. Jackie Greenberg, grateful we have hired an executive director starting November 15th. That is true. Shari Dabowski will be joining our congregational family along with her husband Stuart and their children Lizzie and Benjamin. Reagan also grateful that his sister made it safe to Gainesville to celebrate Halloween with her friends. Alice Miller is grateful that so many kids are going to camp. That is what grows Jewish love and keeping kids in the fold. And Brian Leslie adds, grateful for my health and to be here with my TI family. And lost my shoe. Of course I did. Classy, I know. I'm sure Mark's mother and Norma and my grandmother are having a field day somewhere with that one. Grandma Morrison adds, thankful that last week is done. I'm looking forward to the next week in good health for my family and the TI family. Oh, that's sad. I'm sorry that Amy's grandfather, who was buried 29 years today, can't be here. Wow. That is not the word you're looking for. To something like I do, to the Yiddish. She wrote gavel, but that's not the word she's looking for. But I know Grandpa would be proud, Grandma. I did not know tonight was the anniversary of his burial. So we mark these moments as holy as we turn to page 58 and share together in Hebrew. Baruch atah Adonai hatov shimcha olcha na'eh lehodot. Amen.
Amen.
Kvel was the word Grandma was looking for. Kvel.
Kvel.
Don't we all have that for our families, just that great, and our friends? When we can look at someone and just say, I am in awe, right? The Hebrew word is irah, which is wrongly translated as fear so often. But awe really is when we kind of walk that line between amazement, fear, excitement, and pride. And so let us all be filled with kveling this Shabbat. Amen. We now take some time for silent meditation, and immediately following that, we will join in the words of Yehiyeh Shalom, There Will Be Peace, by Rick Recht. We take some moments to ourselves.
When we hear one another, there will be peace in the world. When we understand one another, there will be peace in the world. When we understand one another, there will be peace in the world. Yehiyeh Shalom, Yehiyeh Shalom ba'olam, Yehiyeh Shalom, Yehiyeh Shalom. When we believe in one another, there will be peace in the world. When we are learning from one another, there will be peace in the world. When we work with one another, there will be peace in the world. Yehiyeh Shalom, Yehiyeh Shalom ba'olam, Yehiyeh Shalom, Yehiyeh Shalom. When we believe that peace will come, we can see the beauty in everyone. When we believe that peace can be, that we are children, one family. Yehiyeh Shalom, Yehiyeh Shalom ba'olam, Yehiyeh Shalom, Yehiyeh Shalom ba'olam, Yehiyeh Shalom, Yehiyeh Shalom ba'olam, Yehiyeh Shalom, Yehiyeh Shalom.
I see that we have been joined by Henry Wolf Jr. as well as a few others. It is good to have you. Shabbat Shalom. And I think when I get to this Torah portion every year, as I get to any Torah portion each year, my perspective changes. And tonight, I'm going to take a very different angle on the Torah portion of Chaye Sarah. Chaye Sarah, which are the first two unique words in the Torah portion, which is why it's named that, means the life of Sarah. In the very first stanza, in the very first pasuk, it talks about Sarah's number of years that she's lived, and then it says, and Sarah died. Sarah died. So many times we talk about what that means, what is the span of a life. I remember last year at this time I read the poem The Dash. How do you live the little dash in between the year you were born and the year you passed away? Many times people will talk about the relationship between Abraham and Hagar, between Isaac and Ishmael in this Torah portion. We get the beginning of the two half-siblings of Islam and Judaism. But I actually want to take us a trip back to the last Torah portion and tie it in. At the very end of last week's Torah portion, we read the words of the Akedah, of the binding of Isaac, of Abraham taking Isaac up on top of Mount Moriah, of taking Isaac, binding him literally, God saying, take your son, your only son, and sacrifice him to show your devotion to me. God asks Abraham, some might say God commands Abraham to kill his child, to show just how much he loves God. At the very last minute, God says, as Abraham's hand is about to kill Isaac, no, I get it, you do love me. You see that animal over there, that ram, send it into the thicket, kill that instead. But we don't hear again of this narrative, although we do hear it on the high holidays. We don't hear it again in the Torah. And what we definitely don't hear is the voice of Isaac. And that's actually where I want to go tonight. Many rabbis have looked at this Torah portion and left out what happened a few sentences before it started. They don't look at how does Isaac move on from the moment that his dad was about to kill him to show devotion to God. Rabbis don't seem to delve very deep into what was Isaac feeling, what was the process that Isaac had to go through of forgiveness in order to move on with his life. Albeit Abraham dies at the end of this Torah portion too, and Isaac and his brother bury him. But how does a human being do the highest commandment, the highest mitzvah of burying our dead, a Torah portion after his father tried to kill him to show his devotion? I was thinking a lot about forgiveness tonight when I was thinking about this Torah portion. This first book of the Torah, Bereshit, is all about our fallible matriarchs and patriarchs. Not fallible so we can mock them, but fallible so we can see ourselves within them and through them, and see how with our devotion towards them, we too can be proud of our faults and our flaws. As they say, the cracks are where the light comes through. So how did Isaac go from laying on a rock about to be killed by his father to the very next Torah portion? We don't know how much time passed. The very next Torah portion of him burying his father respectfully. I want you, I want all of us to think about something in our lives that has been horribly painful. You know, usually I stand up here and give this Nechemtza sermon, these uplifts, this high excitement and enthusiasm, but I will get there. But go on this journey with me. Think of something that was horribly painful in your life that someone else did to you. And when you have it, I want you to feel that feeling in your guts, in your kishka, in your heart, in your soul, that feeling, all those feelings, those huge feelings. And then I want you to think about how long ago that was, whether it was years ago in your childhood or this morning somewhere in line. And I want you to think, how did you pass time? Not just how did you pass time till today, but how did you fill that time? And not just how did you fill that time with actions, but how did you fill that time healing those feelings? Or have you healed those feelings? Have you even addressed those feelings? Keep that in mind. I have so many people come into my office for counseling that say my mother or father is on their deathbed and I cannot forgive them for the childhood I had. What am I supposed to do, Rabbi? It is such an unbelievably personal question. We have a lot of options. One, which I think a lot of people would say is, well, forgive them. They're about to die. If you don't forgive them now, how are you ever going to forgive them? And I think for some people that's a great option. For others, on the complete end of the other polarity is, don't forgive them. What do they deserve that forgiveness for? Just because they're dying Doesn't mean all of a sudden they didn't do what they did or what you perceive that they did. But I think for most human beings, it's somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. For most human beings, some time has passed, some feelings have grown, some thoughts have matured, and whether there's full empathy or not, we might be able to find ourselves looking through the lens that possibly they looked through in those moments that made this memory so painful for us. I want you to think about Isaac now in the same situation that you just decided was this moment to look at tonight. Isaac, it's told to us in the Midrash, looked into his father's eyes, and at first there was a coldness, there was an emptiness. Abraham was acting with the covenant with God. But as Abraham drew his hand up, the rabbis say, Abraham's eyes dimmed. They filled with tears as Isaac stared into him. Stared into him, not upon him. As Isaac saw Isaac's self inside of Abraham's eyes, or as Abraham saw his son and felt that connection, a moment happened between them. Some rabbis say that's when God became present. That's the moment God said to Abraham, stop, because they truly could see one another as human beings. So I'm going to ask you again to go to that painful moment. What do you need so that you can see the human being that was on the other side of this situation? What do you need to understand? What picture needs to be made bigger? What language needs to be changed? What feelings need to be understood so that you can move forward more complete? Mind you, I'm not saying so you can get over it or so you can heal, but so you can move forward more complete. Think about it. Would an apology suffice? Would understanding the bigger scenario that that person was going through at that time help? Would your naivete of the world help shape why you couldn't figure it out in that moment? What was it? Because you're not in that moment any longer. In this week's Torah portion, no longer is Isaac a young boy under his father's weapon to hurt him. Isaac has had many years here to grow. He has watched his mother suffer. He has watched his mother come to life again. He has watched his father marry another woman and have another child. He has gone through life. He himself has aged. He himself will marry and have children. He's transitioned. What do you need to transition, to move that moment to now so you can be more complete? I don't know when this happened for Isaac or even if it happened for Isaac, but it makes me feel comforted that at the end of his father's life, he could stand hand in hand with his half-brother and bury his father respectfully. This week, this Shabbat, I want us to remember that forgiveness is not a given, and many times it certainly isn't easy. But do you want to have a relationship with this person? Do you want to hold a grudge? Do you want to be broken? Or do you want to walk away a little more complete? Because how we respond is everything in this life. And it is up to us to take ownership of our feelings. Talk to that child, that adult, that person who you were. Tell them what you needed to hear in that moment, and take a moment to tell the person that caused you this feeling what you wish you could have said in that moment. It doesn't take away what happened. It certainly won't erase those feelings. But what it does, just like Isaac, is allows you to show up as an adult with different choices and to live the values that you have. To live the commandment as he did to bury the dead, and the commandment that you have to be in a covenant with God. I pray this Shabbat that we can all enter into Havdalah tomorrow night a little more complete, a little more feeling like we're in control of our emotions and what happens to us in life, not because bad things don't happen, but because we get to choose how to respond. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will this Shabbat and always. Amen.
Give me a chance to make it right today. Give me a chance to cast it all away. Help me remember that I am worthy of your love. Give me a chance to prove my love to you. Give me a chance to start it all anew. Help me remember that I am deserving of forgiveness. I want to sing your song. I want to be your prayer. I want to live my life in your care. I want to be your voice, to be free from harm. I want to live my life in your arms. Give me a chance to be the best I can. Give me a chance to be just who I am. Help me remember that I am a servant of your will. Give me a chance to stop into the light. Give me a chance to make it all right. Help me remember that there is a purpose to my life. I want to sing your song. I want to be your prayer. I want to live my life in your care. I want to be your voice, to be free from harm. I want to live my life in your arms. I want to sing your song. I want to be your prayer. I want to live my life in your care. I want to be your voice, to be free from harm. I want to live my life in your arms.
Cantor, I think, again, we are aligned. That is unbelievable.
As soon as I came up and started to sing, I said, oh, Amy's got to be thinking, you know.
I thought you switched the song during my sermon. That is...
We just are on the same channel, thank God. We got the great energy.
Thank God.
And we're blessed.
May we all be blessed as we come together now to think of those who are in need of healing, those in our lives, those of us on this screen and in our hearts. I invite you to say those names out loud where you are, to enter those names into the chat. And in a moment, we will join together on page 253 to pray for their healing. Any names in the sanctuary?
The Corin family.
Mark? Maria? Paula? And we join together and add all those names that you are putting into the chat. And we turn now again, page 253, for the words of Misha Berach.
Misha Berach Avotenu Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, Uyevarech, Virapeh Hacholim. Elna, Refana la, Elna, Refana la. Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, Uyevarech, Virapeh Hacholim, Uyevarech, Virapeh Hacholim.
We pray for refuat hanefesh, for refuat haguf, refuah shleima, complete and total healing of body, mind, and spirit, and let us say, Amen. I invite the congregation in a moment to join us in the words of Aleinu, but I want to remind you all that you are going to absolutely want to stay on this Zoom channel this evening as we welcome Marcia Zarevitz, who will be speaking in our first Lev of Legends, but I love Lev Belev, also Heart and Heart,
Yes.
and Heart of Our Legends. Mark Nedlin will be introducing her, as this is part of our centennial programming, and he is our chair of the entire centennial year. So you'll just stay where you are, get comfy, and listen to these incredible words and these stories of a really powerful and impactful woman. Tomorrow morning, Ariel Galore will be called to the Torah at 10 a.m. I hope you will join us as he leads our congregation not only in tefillah, in prayer, and words of Torah with his reading, but also in Torah study during that service. Because of that, it is our custom at Temple Israel that Joseph's Table takes place during services, so that our youngest Jewish adults will have a chance to teach us as well. This Sunday, we have Sunday school, and we continue this next week with our new semester, our new trimester or mini-mester of adult ed classes, as Mark Lamb continues with Talmud. My adult B'nai Mitzvah class, all 10 of them, will begin their year-long course on Monday evening. Of course, Reb Cantor Nelson, I am all over the place, Cantor Nelson's class begins, and there are so many opportunities as we approach not only Halloween, as I saw Lee write in the chat, not only Thanksgiving, but Hanukkah at the end of November. So we will move through this next mini-mester, which concludes at that point. So I hope that you will join us for all of these amazing programs. Also Sisterhood is offering a program on Sigid, which is the Ethiopian Israeli holiday, and I hope that you will also look at your e-blast to find out exactly where that is. I see Yvonne Linares is on screen. Just give me a thumbs up that we're good on that, Yvonne. Yes. So check your e-blast. There's more on that holiday, as well as where you can log in, and I thank Sisterhood for offering such an important educational program. So I now invite the congregation to please rise if you are able. We turn to page 282 for the words of Aleinu L'Shabeach. The ark is opened. Aleinu L'Shabeach L'Adon HaKol, L'Atet Kedula Le'otzer Breshit, Shelo Asanu Kigayei HaRatzot, Velo Samanu K'mishpachot Adama, Shelo Sam Chelkenu Kahem, Vegor Aleinu
ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגבהי מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום והשב אותה אל לבבך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו
You may be seated. Our thoughts now turn to those who are no longer with us physically, but who are with us very much spiritually. I read a beautiful article this morning in the Huffington Post of a man who met with a medium and who had a chance to feel that his father's presence was around him, that his grandmother was around him. He said, "I don't really care if it's true or not. It gave me hope that my loved ones are still very much with me." And I thought it was just such a beautiful thought that we are not only never alone because God is with us, but maybe those who are no longer with us in this world are there as well. We turn now to page 291. יש כוכבים שהרע מגיע ארצה רק כאשר הם עצמם עבדו ואינם. יש אנשים שזיר זכרם מאיר כאשר הם עצמם אינם עוד בתוכנו. אורות אלה המרחיקים בחשכת הליל. הם שמראים לאדם את הדרך. There are stars up above, so far away, we only see their light long, long after the star itself is done. And so it is with those we love. Their memories are bright stars, and they guide us as we live our days. These are the ways that we remember. I invite you to please enter the name into the chat of anyone who you are thinking of at this time whose yahrzeit, whose anniversary of their death falls, so that we can join you in their prayer and our prayer of memory. In a moment, we will turn to page 294. Any names in the sanctuary for Kaddish?
Millie Corin.
Maria? Paula? No? Mark? Herbie Klein. We also think of these congregants and their loved ones at this time. Still observing the Shloshim, the 30 days of their mourning, are the families of Ida Catherine Harrison, Herbert A. Klein, Barry Richard Soloway. We also add these names whose loved ones are honoring their yahrzeits, their yearly anniversary of their deaths. Josephine Adler, Helen Apt, Samuel Aronovitz, Arthur Milton Bida, Milton Bernstein, Ruth Bloom, Cantor Jacob G. Bornstein, Abraham H. Brown, Louis Cantor, A. Charles C. Klassen, Philip Eisenberg, Ruth N. Ertag, Irving Feinberg, Zolma Gallo, Zapata Sherman, Lillian Gartman, Joseph Glassman, Al Lewis Gluck, Betty Goldstein, Philippe Grimberg, Elliot A. Hayden, Doris Hazen, Morris C. Hodes, Maxine R. Jacobs, Robert J. Jacobson, Adele Jenkauer, Lillian J. Kahn, Arthur M. Kahn, Shirley Aronson Keys, J. Burton Keys, Benjamin H. Cole, Gregorio Korenfeld, Abraham Cooperberg, Bertha Lack, Jean Sarah M. Lewis, Solomon Lewis, Lillian Linden, Abraham Lamaskin, Samuel C. Mann, Moses Marks, Barbara Z. Moss, Harry L. Nathanson, Lucille Nefsky, E. Albert Pallett, David Pasternak, Kate Pollack, Samuel J. Rabin, Hilda Reese, Villy Roth, Bertha Salzberg, Louis Salzberg, Fred P. Schoenwald, Isaac M. Shane, Jacob Scher, Louis Snetman, Rose Sontag, Elliot Taxman, Pearl C. Trost, Melvin Waterstone, Harry Weinberg, Samuel Walk, Hannah Young, Erwin R. Weil, Getzel Zilber, and of course, the Tree of Life synagogue victims, as their yahrzeit falls at this time as well. If I mispronounced your loved one's name, I'm sorry. Please say it again where you are as we join in one voice, in one heart, with the words of Mourner's Kaddish, page 294. Please rise. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, b'alma divrach cherutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayachon uvyomechon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shemei rabbah mivarach leolam olmei maya. Yitzbarach v'yishtabach v'yitzpoar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei dekudesha b'richu le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Zichronam levracha, may their memories forever be a blessing and a lesson for how we can live our lives. And let us say, Amen. Amen. You may be seated. We are going to join now in the words of Oseh Shalom, which can be found on page 62. Oseh Shalom reminds us peace is not a given. We must be active participants in pursuing it. As we go out into this Shabbat, as we go out and wake up every morning with a new opportunity at our lives, let us not be passive. Let us not be observers. Let us be active. Let us be activists as we go after all that we want in our lives and more. Oseh Shalom.
Oseh Shalom, b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'yimeru amen. Oseh Shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'yimeru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'yimeru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'yimeru amen.
We join together in the words of Kiddush. Vayhi erev vayhi voker yom hashishi, ויחולו השמיים והארץ, ויחול צבאם, ויחול אלוהים ביום השביעי, בכל מלאכתו אשר עשה. וישבות ביום השביעי, בכל מלאכתו אשר עשה. ויברך אלוהים את יום השביעי, ויקדש אותו, כי בו שבת בכל מלאכתו, אשר ברא אלוהים לעשות סברי.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav, v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho, v'ahava urato, inchilanu. זיכרון למעשה בראשית, כי הוא יום תחילה במקראי קודש, זכר לתחיית מצרים. בחרת אותנו קידשת מכל העמים, ושבת קודשך ואהבה ורצון הנחלתנו. ברוך אתה אדוני. מקדש השבת, 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 מקדש השבת.
L'chaim, and we join in the words of Motzi. The challah has not yet been touched. Oh, there's wax in it, though. Uh-oh. What are we going to do about dinner, Cancer?
We'll have to eat from the other half.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
That's what the screen is.
Amen. And before we go into a reprise, I want to thank Jose Blanco.
Thank
I
you,
want to
Jose.
thank, of course, Cantor
1,
Nelson,
2,
Pat
3, 4.
Seymour, Jeannie Bernard, Maria Ayerbe,
1, 2, 3,
Paula
4.
Xanthopoulos, and of course, Mark Nedlin, who I'll invite up to the podium to join me in our final version of Oseh Shalom, who will then introduce this evening's program. We join together and wish you all a Shabbat Shalom.
Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael ve'yimeru. Amen.
Well, Shabbat Shalom, and thank you, Rabbi Morrison, thank you, Cantor Nelson, thank you, Jose, and Pat, and Maria, and Jeannie, and of course, Paula Xanthopoulos, who's on our Zoom. And thank you to all of you for being here. My name is Mark
Maybe it's 'cause
Nedlin.
it's
I have
on
the
this
honor of
device,
being the
too.
chair of our Centennial Task Force. And I am so excited because tonight is the first of our Love of Legends, our Love of Legends series that will run throughout the year, building up to our centennial in May. I want to thank especially Norma and Michael Orovitz for sponsoring tonight's event. It's a beautiful, I'm all excited about it because it's all about history. I want to say thank you to all of you for welcoming me and Mark Lamb into this congregation 8 years ago and allowing us to be a part of this 100-year history, which is a magnificent history. I just want to also let you all know that something about Michael and Norma Orovitz. Michael Orovitz is a second-generation past president. His father, Max Orovitz of blessed memory, was president in 1944 to 1945. And Norma Orovitz had the distinction of being the first woman president of Temple Israel. And with that, I would like to present you with Norma, who will be talking about tonight's evening. Thank you all very much.
And Norma was my president.
There you go.
Indeed. But as First Lady, I'm going to introduce my first gentleman. Michael, you go first.
Thank you. Marcia Zarovitz was the founding executive director of the Jewish Museum of Florida, FIU. She's a native West Virginian who has lived in Florida for more than half a century. She has been a trailblazer in the American and Floridian Jewish communities, serving national, state, and local organizations, and has broken the glass ceiling as the first woman in many positions. She transitioned to a Jewish communal professional in 1980.
Norma, I'm so sorry. You need to unmute. I'm so sorry.
You're
Please.
muted.
Thank you.
Do I start over?
I'm
Mark?
so sorry.
Yes. Okay, so I should start over?
Yes, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Okay. Did you all hear Michael's intro?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, I'm sorry, Marcia. From 1984 to 1992, Marcia traveled 250,000 miles throughout Florida, recruiting and training hundreds of volunteers to conduct grassroots research and retrieving the state's hidden 250 plus years of Jewish history, resulting in a major archive and the Mosaic Jewish Life in Florida exhibit that started in Miami and traveled to 13 cities. For our 70th anniversary, Temple Israel's, in 1992, 3 weeks after Hurricane Andrew hit us, Marcia brought Mosaic to Wolfson Auditorium. Temple Israel was one of the first places to get the exhibit in-house. In 1995, under her direction and planning, this project evolved into the accredited Jewish Museum of Florida on Miami Beach, housed in 2 adjacent restored former synagogues on the National Register of Historic Places.
Marcia retired from the Jewish Museum of Florida in 2011 and continues to curate exhibits, lecture, research, and write on Florida Jewish history and anti-Semitism. She resides on St. Pete Beach with her husband, Elliot.
Her seminal book, Jews of Florida, Centuries of Stories, was released just last year. And tonight, Marcia will speak about the birth and development of our Temple Israel and how its history and congregants became part of the big picture of Florida Jewish history. Marcia, I am just so thrilled that you could join us tonight. And please, the floor is yours, or the Zoom screen is yours.
Okay, I'm going to set up my slides. I hope everyone can see the slides. Thank you, and welcome to our Zoom presentation for Temple Israel. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Norma and Michael, for inviting me to be part of your 100th birthday celebration and the first of your Lev of Legends series. That's quite an honor. The Adrian Arsh Center opened in 2006. Arsht is Jewish, and you've likely been there, and that is the site of the first Temple Israel. 159 years after the first Jews were documented to be living in Florida as Jews, Temple Israel was organized in 1922. Your congregation was a spinoff from Beth David, Miami's first congregation that had formed 10 years prior. This is a drawing of the original building used in 1924 through 1926 that was erected at 275 Northeast 14th Street at a cost for the lot and the building of $215,000. That sounds like a lot of money in 1924. This site became part of Biscayne Boulevard, and the congregation sold the property. They bought it for $19,000. They sold it for $215,000. I got my figures switched. So they bought it for $19,000, which was a lot of money in 1924. And then they sold it for a whopping $215,000. The history of the congregation with 41 charter members has been one of expansion and contraction. While being consistently identified as the congregation of the inner city, the city has grown up around them, and Temple Israel has drawn from many constituencies. Temple Israel was my congregation when I lived in Miami from 1992 to 2011. I was living in Miami because after spending 8 years traveling the state, as Michael and Norma declared before, I was retrieving the unknown Jewish history of Florida for the Mosaic Traveling Exhibit. The board decided to open a museum for Florida Jewish history. We were the first state in the whole nation to have a museum for one ethnic history. I was designated the director and assigned to find a place in Miami-Dade County. Our board president was Jimmy Orovitz, whose family has a long connection to Temple Israel, which I'll talk about in a few moments. I found these buildings on South Beach in a deteriorated state. They housed the synagogue and social hall for the first Jewish congregation on Miami Beach beginning in 1929. After raising the money to restore and adapt them, we opened in 1995. No longer wandering Jews, we had a permanent home for the collections and a place to present exhibits and public programs to tell stories of one ethnic group in a hugely diverse state. The collections that we have archived at the museum and exhibitions that we have mounted over the past 26 years tell compelling stories about Jews in Florida. Until our Mosaic project, this history was hidden, and all those involved, from many from Temple Israel, understood the importance of documenting why Jews can live comfortably in Florida today. This is the cover of my book on the subject. Florida has more than 21 million people. That includes about 720,000 Jews, or about 3.4% of the population. To compare, New York has about 1.8 million, or 8.9% of the state's population, and California has almost 1.2 million, or about 3% of the population. Most people think that no one could be a Florida native or surely not have parents and grandparents born in Florida. You have people in your congregation that meet both criteria. The stereotype of Florida Jewish history and common assumption before our Mosaic research was that Miami Beach was the beginning of Jewish life in Florida post-World War II. But it was 400 years before Jews settled on Miami Beach after Florida was discovered and named in 1513. This is, I think I skipped a slide. This is Malvina Weiss, shown in 1921. Her family settled in Miami Beach in 1919 and was the second Jewish family there. The word history contains the word story. As you know, we Jews are storytellers. As I mentioned, I spent 8 years on the road, organized hundreds of volunteers, as Norman mentioned, in 30 communities, and asked a lot of questions to dig out the history, the stories of Jewish life in Florida. One example is this story about Florida's longest continuing Jewish family. It is 1986, before cell phones, Google, and Wikipedia, and I am in Jacksonville interviewing Rosalie and Robert Coleman about his grandfather, George Delinsky, shown in this photograph. In 1857, George was the first boy born in Florida to a Jewish family that planted roots in the state and has continued to live here as Jews since 1850. They are the longest continuing Jewish family in Florida. I asked Rosalie if they have any of George's personal possessions. She says, I have his pocket watch with Hebrew numerals that he carried his entire life. It's in the safety deposit box at the bank, and no one in the family knows that I have it. Would you like to see it? I say absolutely. And at the bank, I asked if our Mosaic Jewish Life in Florida project could borrow it for display in the traveling exhibition. She says yes. And then in 1995, when we created the Jewish Museum of Florida, I asked if she would donate it to the collections. She said yes. I want to emphasize that this is how the material evidence and collective historic memories of more than 250 years of Jewish life in Florida were retrieved, piece by piece. The family continues to live in Jacksonville and has 75 descendants in Florida into the 8th generation. This Florida map tells a very large story. It reflects the sequence of the earliest documentation of Jewish life in communities around the state. I included photos of Jewish pioneers in each place. Up in the top left, we have Pensacola, which had Jews in 1763, then Micanopy in 1819, Tallahassee as the state capital in 1924, welcomed Jews in 1837. Then we have Key West in the 1840s, and then Jacksonville in 1841, Tampa, 1844. And this is still 48 years before South Florida. You notice I have not mentioned South Florida yet. Ocala in the 1850s, Orlando right after the Civil War in 1865, Palm Beach and Miami in 1892, both in anticipation of Henry Flagler's railroad that was coming down the East Coast. Henry Plant opened the West Coast was his railroad, and Henry Flagler on the East Coast. And then we have St. Petersburg, where I live, in 1901. Then Davie in Broward was the first Jews in 1912. Sarasota and Miami Beach, both in 1913. Fort Lauderdale, 1915. And this was the most surprising thing, Boca, which today hosts the state's largest Jewish population, did not have a Jew settle there until 1931. And then in the 1950s, we had Southwest Florida, which included the Fort Myers, Naples area. Jewish communal organizations are formed to perpetuate Jewish life, culture, and traditions to help ensure Jewish continuity. That's the goal of every Jewish organization. Florida's first Jewish organization was the 1857 Jacksonville Cemetery. Then came congregations that built synagogues or temples. This was the first in Florida. Bethel in Pensacola, which was formed in 1876. It was reformed. By 1900, there were 6 Jewish congregations in Florida, and they all remain in existence. 133 years after the first Jews came to Pensacola, which I mentioned was 1763, 133 years later, Jews settled in Miami in 1896. As Henry Flagler brought the railroad down, as I mentioned, some Russian Jews who had first come to New York heard about the opening of South Florida and followed the railroad first to West Palm Beach, where they opened stores, and then to Miami when the rails were extended there in 1896. There were 12 Jews among the 16 businessmen in the community in 1896, 12 Jews. This photo was taken in 1898 of 3 of those 12 Jews. They were Russian immigrants. From the left, Jacob Schneidman, in the center, Isidore Cohen, and Marcus Frank, who was the son of Julius Frank. By 1900, the only Jews in Miami were Schneidman on the left, his wife Ida, and Cohen. Schneidman died shortly thereafter. I mentioned that Marcus Frank was in that picture. Julius Frank had been killed in a fire on December 24th, Christmas Eve of 1896, that destroyed most of the stores in downtown Miami. Julius and Julia, shown in this photograph, came with 6 children. Julia had the first woman's shop in Miami. Her store survived the fire that killed her husband, but she left for West Palm Beach in 1898 with her children. Isidore Cohen was the first permanent Jewish settler of Miami and a signatory of the city charter in 1896. Ida, who had been married to Jacob Schneidman, who you saw a few photographs back, after he died, she went to New York with her son Murray. In 1904, when Isidore Cohen went on a buying trip to New York, he proposed to Ida, the widow. They married, and she returned with him to Miami. Ida Cohen was the founder of the Miami Jewish Home for Aged, in which Norma was very, very active. Their son Eddie was born in 1907 and attracted much attention from Miami's first bris. The rabbi came all the way from Key West by boat, so you can imagine how long that took. And this was a major event. The courts even closed for the day. In spite of restrictive codes and land deeds that prevented Jews from living north of Fifth Street, this Jewish family came from New York City to Miami Beach in 1913, settled at the very tip of the beach, and was very successful. Hungarians Joe and Jenny Weiss arrived with their son Jesse because Jesse had asthma. The New York doctor said, "Go to the ocean in Florida," which translated to Miami Beach. It was not even a city yet until 1915. Joe's Stone Crab Restaurant has been in the same location since 1918 when they bought this bungalow. The same family owns and runs the restaurant today. Joe's was the first restaurant on Miami Beach and arguably the most famous restaurant in all of Florida. The greater Miami Jewish community grew slowly. In 1912, a group of 35 Jews formed a Jewish cemetery and a congregation, which became Beth David. Fast forward to 1922, when there were about 3,500 Jews in Miami, a group of Reformed Jews left Beth David to form Temple Israel. For Temple Israel's 50th anniversary, this book was written that has a fabulous history. I will present a very quick overview of some of the personalities so you can shed nakas at what your congregation and members have achieved. Harry Simons was the primary mover to organize Temple Israel. He is standing in the doorway of his haberdashery on Flagler Street. Philip Ollendorf was given the honor of naming the new congregation as he was a very large supporter. He chose Israel as that was his father's name. This is his business ad in 1915. He was a German immigrant who came to the United States in 1890, came to Florida in 1892, and then to Miami in 1897. He made money in real estate. Seeking a new location for the temple, remember they were at the site of the Adrian Arch Center originally. The two lots were purchased at Northeast 19th Street and 2nd Avenue. This is the 1927 groundbreaking. Temple Israel remains the downtown or inner city temple today. Frank Wharton, the city manager, was the groundbreaking main speaker. A search for a rabbi continued, and 52-year-old Rabbi Jacob Kaplan was hired for $8,000 in 1926. The new and present building was designed by E.L. Robertson and L.R. Patterson. It was dedicated in February of 1928. The ceremony was highlighted by the oratory of both Rabbi Kaplan and William Jennings Bryan. This Moorish neo-Gothic building on the National Register of Historic Places is Florida's oldest Jewish sanctuary in continuous use by the same congregation. Here is Rabbi Kaplan with a class in the 1920s. Kaplan remained in various capacities until he died in 1965. Rabbi Coleman Zwitman came to Temple Israel in 1936 as assistant rabbi. This paved the way for Rabbi Kaplan's retirement. He went into World War II as an army chaplain for 3 years. He became ill and never recovered. He died in 1949, and 1,200 people came to his funeral. Rabbi Joseph Neret served from 1950 to 1980. Lithuanian, he came to the United States in 1920 and came to Miami from Atlantic City. A great preacher, advocate of continuing religious education and social action. Under his leadership, the congregation grew to 1,800 families, very involved in the community and nationally prominent. In the 1960s, this is showing Rabbi Neret with Cantor Bornstein, who I think I heard, this is his yahrzeit. He was the director of the religious school. Bornstein was hired as the first cantor in 1952. This is what the high holidays looked like for Temple Israel in 1968. Nearly 5,000 people in the Miami Beach Convention Center. Some of the clergy later in the 1980s and 90s, Rabbi Rex Perlmutter, who was the rabbi when I was there, Cantor Rochelle Nelson, and Rabbi Haskell Burnett. And of course, you have Rabbi Amy Morrison and Cantor Nelson today, who reflect the congregation's egalitarian character. A few stories of Temple Israel presidents. In 1944, Max Orovitz became president. He came to Miami in 1925 after graduating law school, but had to take the only available job, which was at a bank. Over the years, he owned various businesses in Miami, including real estate and the Scott Perry Corporation. He was very involved in the Miami Jewish community, was a founder of Mount Sinai Hospital, and served as that chairman of the board at Mount Sinai for 22 years. He also served as vice chairman of the University of Miami Board of Directors, and in 1976, received the Champion of Higher Independent Education in Florida Award for his service to education. He was a member of the Miami group that created the Dan Hotels in Israel, and all-around role models for the Jews. Max Orovitz met Ruth Kaplan when she was just 13 years old in 1925. Max went off to study law at Emory University and told her that when she grew up, he would return and marry her, which he did in 1929. This is the Orovitz family in the 1970s with their children, Michael, who you met earlier and you know, Jimmy and Felicia and their spouses. I mentioned that Jimmy Orovitz was the first president of Mosaic. His brother Michael was among the small group of second-generation Temple Israel presidents in 2001. The first was Henry E. Wolfe Jr. Prior to that, Norma was the first female president, 1989 to 91. Michael has been very active in the Jewish Museum of Florida. Leonard Abbas came to Miami in 1925 to be an accountant for the Chroma Cassell's department store. Very active at Temple Israel and was a founder of Mount Sinai, among other institutions. He built homes, hotels, and banks. He was granted the second charter in the United States in 1933 for a federal savings and loan, Miami Beach Federal Savings and Loan. He started City National Bank in 1946. That was a family bank for more than 50 years. Your sanctuary bears Bertha's name. Another major Temple Israel family and a merger of two pioneer families was the Rosen and Saywitz. Saywitz came in 1935. The Rosens came in 1936. The 1944 Rosen wedding was at Temple Israel. Arnold served in World War II and started Lennar Homes. This is the 1978 Rosens, the Rosens in 1978 dedicating a sanctuary in the Kendall branch. This represents a period of outreach and then retrenchment for Temple Israel. The Rosens were deeply involved in Temple Israel and civic and Jewish communities. William Singer was president of Temple Israel 1953 to 1954. He was looking for a depression-proof business when he opened a 5-cent hamburger stand in Little River, Miami in 1938. He called it Royal Castle and became king of a chain of burger places. In 1967, he received an award from the Florida Senate for his continuing efforts to upgrade and accelerate Florida's road programs. His daughter, Marlene, married Richard Stone, later U.S. Senator, who I will speak about later. President from 1993 to 1996 was Stanley Tate, who was instrumental in the early development of the Florida prepaid college program. This list recognizes the presidents of Temple Israel since its inception in 1922. Among them are leaders in business and philanthropy, education, professions, and the arts. They have paved the way for success and respect that Temple Israel enjoys today. From my work with Mosaic, I became a Florida history and news junkie, sort of like Norma Orovitz, and making the Jewish connection to the stories. I will share a few with the greater Miami connection. This morning, like every morning, I read the Washington Post on my phone. From 2013 until February of this year, 2021, Marty Barron was executive editor, a position he formerly held at the Miami Herald. In fact, he was the editor at the Miami Herald when we started the Jewish Museum of Florida. And that's how I got to know him. In 1954, he was born in Tampa, where he grew up. His parents had immigrated from Israel and had every news resource available in the home so they could learn about their new country. That's how he got interested in journalism. Barron's role as editor of the Boston Globe was highlighted in the movie Spotlight. He led the 2003 investigation into a cover-up of sexual abuse by priests within the Boston Archdiocese. I'm sure many of you saw that movie, Spotlight. When he was editor at the Miami Herald, the 2001 Pulitzer Prize was awarded for the reporting of the raid to recover Elian Gonzalez, the Cuban boy at the center of an immigration and custody dispute in Miami. Newsrooms under his leadership have won 17 Pulitzer Prizes. I watch CNN News also. Five-time Emmy Award winner Jeff Zucker has been president of CNN Worldwide since 2013. He was born and raised in Miami. He also is retiring this year in December. I check my family on Facebook, the world's largest social network, which is getting a lot of press today. Isn't that how we track our children and grandchildren, though, on Facebook? Sheryl Sandberg has been number 2 at Facebook since 2008. She grew up in North Miami Beach and maintains a circle of women friends from middle and high school there. In my wallet is a $100 bill with Robert Rubin's signature. Rubin was sworn in as the 70th U.S. Secretary of the Treasury in 1995 and served 4 years. As a fourth grader, Rubin moved with his family from New York to Miami Beach. He graduated from Miami Beach High School in 1956 and went on to become a lawyer, banker, and economist. Journalists say they would rather tell the story than be the story. One of the most tragic stories is of dual American-Israeli citizen and journalist Stephen Sotloff, shown in the center of this photograph with the black helmet. He was beheaded by ISIS on international television in September 2014 in Syria. I'm sure that all of you remember that. He was born and raised in Miami, a grandson of Holocaust survivors. He studied Hebrew and Arabic in Israel and Yemen so he could tell human interest stories about the Middle East. You likely remember the news story in October of 2020 that the United States brought 2 ISIS militants to Virginia for a federal trial. These 2 men were part of the group that kidnapped, tortured, and murdered Stephen Sotloff and 3 other Americans. So when did Florida Jewish history begin? Most are not aware that Jews could not live in Florida for 250 years after Florida was discovered in 1513. That is when Ponce de Leon first reached Florida's east coast, found the natives hostile, and named the new land La Florida after Pascua, Florida, which means the Feast of Flowers because it was Easter time. Since this was during the Inquisition, which lasted from 1478 to 1834, and Ponce de Leon sailed for Spain, which then owned Florida, only Catholics could live here for the next 250 years, until 1763. This is when the Treaty of Paris was signed. Following the 7 years or French and Indian War, the final phase of the century-long Anglo-French struggle for colonial and commercial supremacy. In this treaty, Spain ceded Florida to Britain, and people other than Catholics could finally settle here, including Jews. These 1765 Pensacola Council minutes reflect the names of 3 Jews who arrived in 1763. Alexander Solomons, Joseph de Palacios, and Samuel Israel bought property and stores and did business with the British and others in the Southeast, selling wood and dry goods. We've been taught that the first Jews arrived in America in 1654 in New Amsterdam that became New York, after sailing from Recife, Brazil, to escape the Inquisition there. In the early 1980s, when we began our research, it was my hypothesis that it was possible that American Jewish history started here in Florida, in St. Augustine, in 1565 with conversos. If this could be documented, it would rewrite all of American Jewish history that it started here in Florida. And wouldn't that be a shock to New Yorkers? Historians note that the third Florida governor, Pedro Menendez Marquez, could have been a converso. And there are Spanish Jewish names on the list of soldiers and settlers in St. Augustine in 1565. We now know that Antonio Carvajal was the chief harbor pilot in St. Augustine from 1577 and 78, was the first person of Jewish descent to live in what would become the United States. That is 77 years prior to Jews arriving in New York in 1654. So we can say proudly that likely the history between 1492 and 1654 needs to be rewritten to include this chapter in Florida in the 16th century. We do know that 200 years ago, 26 years before Florida's 1845 statehood, one Jew took advantage of the development opportunities. No photo exists of Moses Levy, only this house drawing that is based on Levy's writings. In 1820, a year before Florida became a U.S. territory, Moroccan-born Moses Levy began purchasing 100,000 acres that spread from around Gainesville, south to Sanford, and west to Tampa Bay. Levy formed the Florida Association, the very first development corporation in Florida. Moses Levy was the most important person in early Florida Jewish history. He built a 1,000-acre pilgrimage plantation just south of Gainesville. Pilgrimage was a fully functioning plantation that lasted from 1822 to 1835. Its main commodity was sugarcane, which Levy reintroduced to Florida. It was intended as a refuge for oppressed European Jews to become farmers in a communitarian settlement, the very first on U.S. soil. Felix Warburg of the famous German banking family was his recruiting agent in Europe. At least 5 German Jewish families lived here, including Warburg. If any of you on the Zoom went to the University of Florida, you know that there is a Lake Warburg named on the campus for him, for Felix Warburg. Moses Levy was Florida's first education commissioner, an advocate of public schools, and instrumental in establishing Florida's first free public school in St. Augustine. Even in a slave economy, he was a vigorous advocate for the gradual abolition of slavery, the education of slaves, and the humane treatment of enslaved people. Moses Levy was the father of David Levy Yulee, the first U.S. senator from Florida and the first Jewish U.S. senator in American history. There had been only 2 Jewish senators from Florida. The second was Miami's Richard Stone, who served from 1975 to 1980. David moved to Pilgrimage to help his father on the plantation at the age of 17 and lived there 4 years. But he wanted to become a lawyer. There were no law schools in that day. You had to apprentice. So he went to Tallahassee and he apprenticed and became an attorney, was admitted to the Florida bar in 1836 and got involved in politics. Florida became the 27th state in 1845 under the leadership of David Levy Yulee. He helped draft Florida's constitution and worked hard for statehood when there were about 60,000 people in all of Florida. Remember, there are now over 21 million, 60,000 when Florida became a state. And that included about 100 Jews. He faced anti-Semitism in the U.S. Senate, and because Vice President John Quincy Adams continuously referred to him as an alien Jew delegate from Florida, even though he had gone through citizenship proceedings twice. He served as senator until the secession of Florida from the Union and served in a Union prison for 1 year. Yulee was the family's ancestral name in Morocco, a name he added to Levy when he went to Washington. David Levy Yulee was important both in politics and the economy. In 1861, he formed the Florida Railroad Company, which was the first railroad to cross the state. He went from Fernandina on the east coast to Cedar Key on the west coast. Goods arriving from Europe could finally be shipped across the state instead of going all the way around the tip of Key West. The railroad operated for 80 years. In my book, you'll find an interesting story about Confederate gold hidden at another one of his plantations, and also a defense about his conversion. The evidence is that he died a Jew. Moses Levy's plantation was destroyed at the start of the Second Seminole War in 1835, and this is when I introduce another important Jewish person in early Florida history, Abraham Myers, for whom the city of Fort Myers is named on the west coast of Florida. One of the major pioneer families, along with the Dolinskys, are the Benjamins. Born in Prussia, Simon Benjamin came to Florida in 1865, right after the Civil War. He came to Alachua County to establish a business in the village of Waldo. He stayed in Waldo for 3 years until he was literally run out of town by the Ku Klux Klan and moved to Ocala, where he already had family. He and other family members opened Florida's first known ice making plant. Imagine, this was a time when there were no refrigerators in which to store and preserve meats or electricity to operate them, even if they had existed. Many homes contained ice boxes, and the Benjamins delivered ice on wagons. He was president of the temple in Ocala and on the school board. And then he moved the family into Jacksonville in 1901 because Jacksonville was the up and coming and the largest Jewish community in Florida. And he began a cigar business and served as president again of a congregation, this time a Havas Hesed. His son Roy, in the left circle, the back left, became an architect, very famous and acclaimed for theaters. He designed more than 200 movie theaters, nearly one in every Florida town, including in 1934, the Art Deco Colony Theater on Lincoln Road on Miami Beach. The stories go on, and they're so much fun. Meet Saul Snyder, the cattleman in St. Augustine. In 1904, after serving in the Russian army, he left and was sent by the Jewish Agricultural Society to Fernandina Beach. Then in 1908, he settled in St. Augustine because he made the 10th man for a minyan. His cattle brand was Mogan David, which in Hebrew, of course, means Shield of David. And his ranch was named Bar Mitzvah. This is Emma's the truth. Snyder was a founder of the Florida Cattlemen's Association in the 1950s when cattle was the state's largest industry. Jews in Florida have from the beginning made a living in retail and wholesale goods, first as peddlers. Then the peddlers transitioned into mom and pop stores around 130 years ago. This is the Canner family from Hush, Romania. 8 siblings, I just love this. 8 siblings, brothers and sisters, went to 8 different Florida towns in the 1880s so they would not compete with each other. The 5th generation is living in Miami today, Ellen Canner. Her parents were Marcia and Lou Canner, who, along with Lewis's father, Aaron, were absolutely Temple Israel members. Then there were large department stores opened by Jews in Florida. This is Abe and Ben Amaz in Tampa in 1895. They came from Germany in 1894. The brothers joined them. The first Maz Brothers store was in 1896, and it became a chain of 39 stores that lasted 105 years and is now incorporated into the Macy's chain. Samuel and Morris Cohen arrived from Ireland in 1867 when Jacksonville was still under military occupation of the Civil War and established a very small Cohen Brothers store. In 1912, they built this mammoth department store occupying a full city block. It was the largest structure in the city and at one time was the 9th largest department store in the United States. In business for 120 years, the building is now Jacksonville City Hall. And then Florida Jews developed shopping centers like University Town Center in Sarasota, developed by Nathan Benderson, one of the nation's newest shopping malls, and Aventura Mall, owned by the Sofer family, Florida's largest mall, and the nation's second largest with more than 3 million square feet. And talk about largest. Auschwitz survivor Tibor Hollow arrived in New York in 1945 with $18. You've heard these stories about Holocaust survivors. In 2018, he opened the tallest building in Florida at 868 feet and 85 stories in downtown Miami with a 2,000 car parking garage at a cost of $800 million. We think that's really big, right? And then consider New York's 28 plus acre, 25 plus billion dollar Hudson Yards project, as the press calls it, a nation state for the 1%, brought to you by the most powerful city shaper in modern times. Stephen Ross graduated from Miami Beach High School in 1958, attended the University of Florida, and became the founding chair of the related companies. Ross is shown here as standing on the highest outdoor observation deck in the Western Hemisphere at his Hudson Yards. In the area of construction, look at this view of Miami Beach with the hotels Heaton Rock and Fontainebleau in the foreground, and realize that those two and so many others were built by Jews, including the architecture, construction, and preservation of Art Deco hotels. Lennar, formed from the names Leonard Miller and Arnold Rosen, I spoke about Arnold a few minutes ago, grew to become the nation's largest home builder by 2017, branching out to mortgage companies, title companies, lending, and commercial management. When Nathan Gumminick decided to build high-rise apartments on Miami Beach in 1959, no one would give him a mortgage. Lenders said no one wanted to live on Miami Beach year-round. Well, who proved them wrong? Kenneth Treaster designed the Sophie and Nathan Gumminick Chapel of Temple, Israel. It opened in 1969 as an architectural sculpture that would portray a feeling of spirituality. Treaster, who was confirmed at Temple, Israel, also designed the Holocaust Memorial on Miami Beach. The Gumminick name is on many Miami buildings as they were generous philanthropists. Jews have developed cities and towns all over Florida, and we have causeways and bridges named for Jews who have contributed much to the development of the state. Some examples in the area are the Norman Giller Bridge, the William Singer Expressway, I already talked about William Singer, and the William Lehman and Broad Causeways. The cruise industry is a major economic driver for our state, bringing in more than $8 billion annually. That was pre-COVID, but they're starting back. Florida is the nation's #1 cruise state, often referred to as the cruise capital of the world. Today, there are 3 major public cruise lines, and all 3 are chaired by Floridian Jews, specifically Miami Jews. Mickey Arison at Carnival, Richard Fain at Royal Caribbean, and Russell Galbert at Norwegian. I devote 13 pages of my book to Jews in politics. You will find the volume of names astounding on the list of federal and state legislators and mayors. The first Jewish mayor of more than 200 that I've been able to document was Henry Brash, shown in the center. He was elected in 1879 and served 3 terms in Marianna, which is very North Florida, then moved to Tampa with his family, shown here. Many early Florida Jewish mayors were Jewish, as they were respected, trusted, good speakers, and considered highly educated. Abe Aronovitz was raised in Key West, one of the 10 sons of Kate and Dave Aronovitz. You saw their store earlier. He settled in Miami in 1922, and after serving in World War II, he went into law practice. Abe served as Temple Israel's treasurer in the early days. As Miami's 27th mayor, he battled anti-Semitism, the police department, and slums, and forced Florida Power and Light to cut rates. Imagine that. Having only one Jewish mayor in Miami is a contrast to Miami Beach, which has had 17 Jewish mayors since Mitchell Wolfson, and the current mayor is Dan Gelber. In November of 2020, Daniela Levine Cava was elected mayor of Miami-Dade County, their first woman mayor, and also Jewish. The Lithuanian Wolfson family settled in Key West in the 1880s. Mitchell Wolfson came to Miami from Key West in 1917. In Miami in 1925, Mitchell Wolfson founded a movie theater chain, Wometco, which stood for Wolfson Meyer Theater Company, with his brother-in-law, Sidney Meyer. In 1943, Mitchell Wolfson served as the first Jewish mayor of Miami Beach. He shortly resigned to serve in World War II because he wanted to go fight the Nazis. And then in 1949, he and Sidney Meyer started Florida's first TV station in the first Wometco Theater, WTVJ. Wolfson controlled Wometco until his death in 1982. It became a giant entertainment and leisure time conglomerate and was sold by the family for nearly $1 billion in 1983, which at that time was the largest corporate sale in the history of South Florida. Florida's had one Jewish governor, David Schultz of Daytona. He was inaugurated in 1933. This photo was taken on February the 15th of 1933. Schultz in the red circle is with President-elect Franklin Roosevelt, who you recognize on the left, and Chicago Mayor Anton Cermak on his left, your right. Cermak was shot in the Roosevelt assassination attempt at Bayfront Park in Miami. He died of his wounds in Jackson Memorial Hospital. Giuseppe Zangar was convicted of murder and electrocuted in 1 month. Remarkable. David Schultz served 4 years. He was a dynamic public speaker and took the reins of state government when the worst effects of the Depression were being felt in Florida. He paid the bills, distributed free school books, gave more money to schools, and started commissions to serve the public good. We've had nearly 300 Jewish judges to the present in Florida. 5 Jews have served on Florida's Supreme Court. In the 1980s, as I gathered photos, I developed a slideshow. There were no computers or digital in those days, and I spoke all over the state at congregations like yours and at all Jewish organizations to appeal for more photos and stories. These treks were very productive in getting more stuff and making very interesting connections. This is a typical German Jewish family, the Gundersheimers, arriving in Milton, Florida, again, very north of Pensacola, 15 years before the Civil War. I learned that Anna in the circle, second on the left, had married Russian Jew Jacob Barker. Their son, Bernard Barker, lived in Cuba, married, and in 1917, they had Bernard Barker Jr. Now, when I was told that story, the name Bernard Barker Jr. sounded so familiar. Does anyone know it? He was the plumber in the Watergate break-in in the Democratic headquarters in 1972. Imagine that. Ann Shops in Pensacola, who gave me that family picture, saw her cousin come into Temple one Shabbat when prisoners from Eglin Federal Prison were brought in. He was born in Cuba. He had moved to Miami in 1960 and first been recruited by E. Howard Hunt as an undercover operative in the CIA-directed plots to overthrow Cuban leader Fidel Castro at the Bay of Pigs in 1961. And then he was recruited for Watergate. After prison, he worked as a building inspector for the city of Miami. Descendants are still in Pensacola, and yes, they're still Jewish. I always get asked that. Some Florida Jews are famous, and some are infamous, like Meyer Lansky, whose career was crime, but the government could never convict him. He was a member of Congregation Beth Jacob on Miami Beach that became the Jewish Museum of Florida, and there is a stained glass window dedicated to him in the museum. And in the photo in the top left, he was known as the chairman of the board. In this photograph, he's with his sons, Paul on the left and Buddy, in Miami Beach in 1942. He had a home in Miami Beach since the 1930s when he began his gambling there. This Russian immigrant died in Mount Sinai Hospital on Miami Beach in 1983 at the age of 81. Anti-Semitism, as you know, has risen globally by 18% in the past year, 40% in Florida. As reported by the ADL, Florida has the third highest number of anti-Semitic incidents after New York and California. In the past 18 months, we've seen a tsunami of anti-Semitic hatred on the internet and social media that baselessly blames Jews for having invented the coronavirus, for intentionally spreading it, profiting from it, or using it as a tool for global control. We know about the hotel restrictions on Miami Beach as portrayed in this hotel brochure on the left, where it says the top Gentile clientele. On the right is the Blackstone Hotel. In 1928, while on vacation on Miami Beach, Nathan Stone was unable to obtain a room because of anti-Semitic policies. Stone purchased land at Washington Avenue and 8th Street and built a hotel that welcomed Jews and Blacks. The building is there today. In 1977, Miami's Richard Stone, grandson of Nathan Stone and Florida's second Jewish United States senator, presented the Silver Star to Herman Edelstein. 60 years after Edelstein was denied the honor due to an anti-Semitic commanding officer. Jews will continue to labor to make this world a better place for everyone, including those who hate us. Even though Jews are less than 0.25% of the global population, Jews have been awarded 22% of all the Nobel Prizes. 2 of those Nobels have been awarded to Floridian Jews. Marshall Nierenberg of Orlando and a 1948 graduate of the University of Florida received the 1968 Nobel Prize in Medicine or Physiology for interpretation of the genetic code and its function in protein synthesis. He died in January of 2010, and his wife donated his papers to the Jewish Museum of Florida. Isaac Bashevis Singer, shown on the right, of Miami Beach, received the 1978 Nobel Prize in Literature. We remain minute in number, but mighty in our contributions to humanity. Jews are like cut flowers. We die without roots. These stories are our collective historic memories, our roots. The stories of people who founded and nurtured your congregation and the buildings over the years will strengthen and sustain you into the next 100 years and help ensure Jewish continuity. If you are inclined to buy my book, and it's very large, it's a big, heavy book, weighs almost 5 pounds, 434 pages, 760 photos, you can email me at mzarovitz@me.com. If you're inclined to purchase one, it's a good time because Hanukkah starts on November the 28th. Now you know that Florida Jews and Temple Israel of Greater Miami have deep roots in the Sunshine State. I hope this gives you a tremendous sense of pride. Thank you for allowing me to share your Centennial Legend series. Shabbat Shalom.
Marcia, if we were in the Bertha Abbas Sanctuary, you would have a standing ovation. This was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I thank you so much. Michael and I are so pleased that as a friend, as a community resource, even though you went over to the left coast, that you're still available to us. We are thrilled. The way Mark Nedlin has planned this program is that we have time for Q&A. If you would list your questions in the chat, I'll read them to Marcia, and then she can further elucidate. And to get started, Marcia, this still makes me curious. You use the expression Floridian Jews. How did you decide to go that route rather than Jewish Floridians?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I've had this argument about American Jews since my elementary school years. We are Jews no matter where we live. So Jews is a noun. The adjective about where you're from or where you are is Florida or American. That's the adjective, but we are Jews. That's the noun. So it was no discussion on my part. It was just, we were going to be Floridian Jews.
I'm an English major. I should have figured that one out. And until we get, I've got a lot of stuff here on the chat, people thanking you and saying what a wonderful presentation. I jotted a couple of questions just to fill the airtime until we get more. When the first Jew was born in the state of Florida, who did the bris? Was there a boy?
It was a girl.
I'm sorry?
The first Jew born in Florida was in the Pensacola in the 1700s, but it was a girl, so that was not an issue.
Okay.
The first bris, George Delinsky, I mentioned him. He was the first boy born of that continuing Jewish family. That's the family that's been in Florida the longest.
Right.
They brought rabbis in from other areas, like from South Carolina, or even as far as Philadelphia. Now, just like before there was a Jewish cemetery in Florida, Jewish bodies, if they wanted a Jewish burial, they were sent to Charleston, South Carolina, or Philadelphia.
Okay, okay. And on the note of Jewish cemeteries, right across the street from us, if you go 1 block south to the Miami City Cemetery, there is a Jewish section walled off. Paul George has done tours of the city cemetery, of course, and done specific tours for us in the Jewish section, where there are several early presidents of Temple Israel buried, and then a trio of siblings who died a couple of days apart during the Spanish flu epidemic, and they share a joined tombstone. Absolutely tragic. If anybody wants to take a tour, touch base with Paul George over at History Miami. Okay, let's see if we have any questions. Oh, look at this. Okay, Mark Teitelbaum, immediate past president. I graduated from the University of Florida, and there is a dormitory called Yulee Hall. Now I know who the building is named after. Thank you. Remarkable presentation. Can you further talk about David Levy Yulee?
Oh, I could talk a lot about David Levy Yulee. The most controversial thing about Yulee is that so many people say that he died a Jew, and that he did not die a Jew, that he converted. And for those of you that knew Sam Proctor, if there are people here from the University of Florida on the Zoom, you knew Sam Proctor. He taught Florida history at the University of Florida for over 50 years. He was sworn to the fact that David Levy Yulee never converted. And then in doing the research, I found in the papers, and there's a huge assemblage of Yulee papers at the University of Florida Library. In the Price Library, there's the Price Judaic Library at the University of Florida. And actually there was a letter written after he was out of office from his wife, Nanny, begging him to be converted. So that proves that he had not been converted before, and he was not converted. He died a Jew. That's, like I said in my presentation, just kind of glossed over it. But that letter proves that he had not converted because his wife is still asking him to convert.
To do so. Sarah Leviton, who is a history nut, just like I am, Sarah, that's a good thing, wants to know, would you please speak about the Wolkowski family, longtime Temple Israel members? Dr. Ruth Greenfield is a big part of it, and she's usually on the screen. I hope she's still on the screen tonight.
Well, I first met David Wolkowski when I was doing my trek around the state. You mentioned that I traveled 250,000 miles around the state, which I did in the early days of Mosaic, when we had our volunteer task forces in 30 communities. And David was my person in Key West, and he was such a character. He took me all over Key West to show me where the family had come. And if I recall, he had grown up there in Key West, and he went to the University of Pennsylvania and studied architecture. He was very responsible for the modernization, urbanization, I guess you would call it, of downtown Philadelphia. He was very involved in that. And then when the family was dying off in Key West, he decided to go back to Key West and start rejuvenating the family properties there. So he became the man of Key West. In fact, he left a huge water preserve, marine preserve, to the city, which is named for him now. And it's an historical site within I don't remember the terminology, but he was Mr. Key West. And of course, the family moved to Miami. Ruth and her sister, starts with an E.
Edna Wolkowski.
Yeah. Edna. They were both charming. They were very helpful to me when I was gathering the history in the early days. And that's a fabulous family. In fact, there's a book written about the history of Key West, the Jewish history of Key West, that has a lot about the Wolkowski family as well. But I have them in my book. I have pictures of their home that they built, very prominent home in Key West, obviously a very wealthy, prominent family in Key West. They had a big home, and it's pictured in my book.
And I think when David, correct me if I'm wrong, when David Wolkowski passed away, he deeded an island he owned off Key West to either the state of Florida or the United States government, one or the other.
Right, that's part of the property I was referring to. It was the site of a James Bond movie also. And,
Wonderful.
and he knew the character that played James Bond, and he would call David, "Is it okay? I'm invading your island. I'm coming on your island." So one
Okay,
of
talking about islands, Ben Cuny, a past president of Temple Israel, a renowned attorney, has a great subject for you to tackle. Marcia, how has the introduction of Jubins contributed to the Jewish culture of South Florida? Were any of the Cubans arriving in Tampa Jewish? How much, this is like $64,000 question. You got multi-part here. How much did our South Florida business Jewish community contribute to the building of Israel? And then he says, bravo.
Well, that's a multifolded question. Okay. Obviously, when Fidel Castro came to power, most of the Jews left Cuba and most of them, they went all over the United States, but the large majority of them came to Miami. They were not accepted well by the Federation or the Jewish community of Miami, I'm sad to say. That's why they formed their own congregations, their own Jewish organizations. They eventually integrated beautifully into the Jewish community. There are many Jewish leaders from the Cuban community that have now been George Feldenkrais is one example. In fact, when we were building, Michael, you might remember this, when we were building the Jewish Museum of Florida, restoring Beth Jacob, George had a meeting with the Cubans and introduced them to the museum that was in terrible condition. As before we started the restoration, the walls were falling down, the plaster was actually falling down from the ceiling. And the whole meeting was conducted in Spanish, so I have no idea what he said. But at the end of the meeting, they all said they would support us. In fact, there's a big plaque dedicated to Sender and Julia Kaplan in the museum, because the Cuban Jewish community became very participatory with us. And we have a large collection, and we've done great exhibits on the Cuban community. There were some that came to Tampa. The cigar industry, which left, the Cubans first came, many of them came to Key West, and the cigar industry was very large in Key West. And in 1891, there was a big fire in the factories in Key West. And also the city of Key West imposed a peddler's tax. And most of the Jews were peddlers, and they couldn't afford the $1,000 peddler's tax. Imagine a huge sum in 1891. So most of them came to Ybor City, which is the old part of Tampa. Many of them owned some of the cigar factories that were Cuban. So some of them migrated to Ybor City. The majority of the factory owners in Ybor City were not Jewish, but there were many Jewish ones, and some from Cuba. So in fact, there's only one cigar factory left today in Ybor City out of 150 factories that were there, and it's owned by a Jewish family, the Newman family. And what was the other part of his question about South Florida business Jewish community?
How it influenced both business here as well as in the building of Israel?
Well, I mentioned some of them, but I could do a whole lecture. In fact, we did a whole exhibit on that. And Michael's own father, Max Orvitz, was part of the Miami group that was very much contributing to the development of Israel. And Michael could tell that story better than I. When I first met Jimmy, that was what he was so proud of. I remember going to his home to interview him in the very early days of Mosaic. And Jimmy couldn't wait to tell me about this Miami group and show me all the pictures, what they had done in rescuing the immigrants that were coming out of the concentration camps, and the story about the $5,000, which was it $5,000, Michael? Did you finally resolve that it was $5,000? That was a fabulous story. I'm sure you'd like to tell that story.
If you've got time.
Yeah, that's a great story.
We're going to get cut off at 10 o'clock, so make it quick.
Okay. My father and Rabbi Lehrman from Temple Manual and another lady were in Europe visiting the DP camps, and they were due to go to Palestine. And it just so happens that the day that they arrived was the day that the United Nations declared Israel a state. And they could not go to Jerusalem, which is where they planned to go. And I thought about it recently. If they had gotten to Jerusalem, the entire story would have changed. They went to Tel Aviv. they met two brothers that owned a small hotel named Fetterman. And the Fettermans asked my father if he had money with him. My father had a premonition to take $5,000, which was a lot of money, of course, back in those days. So my father wanted to know why they wanted the money. They said because a boat was coming in from Turkey, I believe, and they needed to pay the captain so they could unload the boat. My father said he would give the money as long as he and the others could assist in the unloading of the boat. They stayed at Golda Meyerson's house waiting for the boat to come in. The boat comes in, and these two brothers say to my father, "What are we going to do with all of these refugees?" My father was a somewhat smart man, being from Miami Beach. He says, "You have a beautiful sea, you have beautiful beaches, you need hotels, and then you can put the refugees to work in the hotels." That was the beginning of the hotel industry in Israel. My father came back to Miami and formed a group of about 5 of the leaders of Miami that became partners with the two Israeli brothers, and everything could not have been better for everyone.
So you talk about development of Israel. That's the
Right.
story. That's the
Yeah. That the rest is history. Marcia, when you were talking about the Jubins, and Ben, thank you so much. I really want to give a shout out to the memory of Rabbi Meir Abramowitz, Temple Menorah, when the Cuban Jews didn't have $5 in their pockets and couldn't officially join synagogues. Rabbi Abramowitz was one smart cookie. He opened his arms and said, "Come. Whenever you can support us, you'll support us." I attended a funeral, a memorial service at Menorah right after the condo collapsed because some of my friends died in it. Half of the congregation, there were 700-800 people there, according to Rabbi Perlson. More than half of the congregation grew out of the Jews Rabbi Abramowitz welcomed. We have, according to Mark, we have 2 or 3 minutes, and I want to give Nancy Feldman, that's our taxman's wife here. She said, aside from enjoying your talk, I remember so many of the families you mentioned. I recall that Sidney Aronowitz's uncle Abe was from Key West. Sidney was a city commissioner and became a federal judge here in Miami. And I also want to shout out for Arthur England from Florida Supreme Court. Arthur and Dee Dee were Temple Israel members. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Mark, you just came on my first screen. Are you gonna call
I just
it?
wanted to, this is wonderful, and I just wanted to say to Marcia, this was amazing, and I want to thank you so much. Thank you to Norma and Michael. It's just been such a pleasure tonight. Thank you all for being with us tonight, and thank you for the extra donations that came in for tonight as well. We are going to be doing another Love of Legends next month on the 26th. That will be Joe Fleming speaking about his father, who was rabbi at Temple Israel from the 1930s to 1949, and Coleman A's Whitman. So that'll be happening next month. I want to thank you all again, and Shabbat Shalom.
Good Shabbos. Marcia, you were fabulous, fabulous.
Thank you, Marcia.
Thank you for inviting me. I love seeing Temple Israel in your picture, my temple.
Thank you again.